meeting to order. And please stand for pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So since this is the first board meeting following an election, we need to elect a new school board chair. So I'll take nominations. We'll take nominations for school board chair.
I nominate Elizabeth. I second nomination.
Okay.
So again, I'm also happy to hand that over to anybody else.
Anybody else wants it?
So we have a first and a second for Alyssa.
I think we do. You do an amazing job and we want you right there.
You're very kind.
Any other nominations?
I'm moving the lectern so I can see it. Yeah. I gotta move the lectern.
Gotcha. See, you don't, and I forget what we do. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, the vote carries. Congratulations. And I will turn it over now to our board chair.
Nice.
Well, thank you.
I would make a motion for Sarah Vogel to be vice chair.
Do I have a second?
Second.
You don't need a second for nominations, but that's.
I knew.
That's why we love having Kevin.
That's around. Yes.
Are there any other
Unless you want
vice
it.
chair?
Well, I am going to be vice chair. I think the changes that Deb has made in communication, that I'm willing to do that. So
Well, I will nominate Kevin.
So you're gonna refuse the nomination.
Well, how does that work? Do we put?
You can say I don't want it and then we'll rescind it and nominate.
The
it.
New Hampshire School Board Association
Right.
attorney is here. And I'm sure that how or direct us on how we're supposed to
I
do
think-
this.
I think many years ago, I was here for a very lengthy, protracted
Oh, yeah, we have-
voting for the chair. And I'll say exactly what I said then, it's up to you.
Right.
And
So it can-
whichever,
Yeah, if
in
Sarah
arm
says she would.
wrestle, you can
doesn't
do
want
whatever.
it.
All right, I want to see Sarah and Kevin arm wrestle.
I don't think Sarah's
And the
gonna
best-
go that far.
The best 2 out of 3 wins.
No,
I like Roger.
fine.
That's
Well, I like that Kevin has such a good handle on the Roberts rules and keeps us balanced that way.
I
So,
will rescind my motion.
but thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I think we're very lucky that we have a lot of people who could step into the role.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
appreciate that very much. So,
I will nominate Kevin for vice chair.
all right, any other?
I'll second
Everybody.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Who's on first?
Okay, so our next order of business is to elect a secretary.
I do it for a year. I don't know if I'll be back longer than that, but. Thank you.
nominate Jaden T.
Thank you. And she's just said she would do it for a year. That's wonderful. Appreciate that. Is there anybody else who has an interest? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, appreciate it very much.
And
All right, at this time, I welcome Will Phillips here from the New Hampshire School Board Association. He's got a presentation for us, which I think will set us off for a really, really good year. With that,
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting us here once again. My understanding is that only one of you is a new member. So, hello. So I'll probably try to move a little more quickly than normal. But anytime anybody has a question that's pertinent to what I'm talking about, hopefully, just stop. I'm happy to answer the questions. Usually the questions are more important and informative. The answers, I hope, more important and pertinent than just my spilling information on your tables. So pertinent questions anytime. If you have a question that, maybe it comes later in the slides, or if I don't touch it at all, maybe we'll have a few minutes at the end. However, if we get through and we don't get to the questions, or you have questions on the drive home, my contact information is on the back. I'm always happy to receive calls or emails. Usually emails to set up a call is probably the most efficient way to do it. But anyway, I'll get started. The presentation tonight is really the most basic overview of school board functions, roles, and responsibilities. And hopefully I can figure out how to use this clicker. Not that way. This way, not that way.
Usually.
There we go. Okay, so I try to include a slide index, just hopefully the presentation or the document can be a resource down the road. So it tends not to be just pure outline. There tends to be a little more content than you might see in other presentations. Also, there are two handouts that I think are very valuable resources for school board members. I'm not going to deal with them much tonight, but so one is resources for board and board member roles and responsibilities, and a couple of things that are helpful in there, probably closer to the end. I think, let's see, pages 18 through 21. There are some statutory indexes. One is selected index of major New Hampshire education laws. If you've tried to meander through our state laws, you'll find that they're sprinkled all over the place. Sometimes you're looking in places that you would not imagine them to be. And then the other one is selected statutory duties and powers of school boards. And we're going to cover like large, sometimes we call them buckets of responsibilities, whereas on pages 20 and 21, you'll see some very specific duties that if we try to cover all of those, it might take a little longer than we have. And then the second handout is the right to know law resources. We do update this one every year because, the legislature likes to amend the right to know law every year. So it gets updated every year. But it includes a full excerpt of the right to know law, or excerpt being pertinent to school districts. And frankly, that's almost all of the right to know law, but there are things that are, applicable to parole boards that we don't need in there and so forth. Let's see, forgot the other parts. Then there's a 2-page everything you need to know sort of thing that just walks through the basics of the right to know law. And then perhaps most importantly, and we're not going to dig deeply into the right to know law tonight, but the first 2 substantive pages of the handout are, whether you call it a checklist or a script or an outline of non-public sessions, it does walk through in pretty good detail, I think, all the little pieces that apply to non-public sessions. And I guess there is a slide where I talk about it, so I won't dig into it now. And then before I start off with the presentation, we do have several upcoming webinars, and they're open. I think you are subscribers, right? Yeah. So at no fee, anybody who is on the board can register for the webinars. If you're not available at the time we run the webinars as subscribers, you're able to go into the library and watch the videos at any time. But for the next couple of weeks, we've got a right to know law deep dive overview and introduction. It's really not a deep dive. It's a pretty good dive into an introduction, but new school board member orientation is April 8th. And then April 10th, we repeat it because some boards meet on the Tuesday night and some meet on the Thursday night. So we offer it twice. And then importantly, we have the legislative update crossover day update. So that will be April 11th. And then there's a few more, school board chair, effective school board meetings for school board chairs and other members. That's on April 16th, but you can find all of those on our website. Have you been inundated by our emails yet?
No,
Oh, so,
I'm not sure I'm set up, for it. You will be.
yeah, very,
You
very
will be.
soon, and, you know, we try not to, send too many, but sometimes there's lots of things happening. But if you put us in spam, you won't get any, which, you know, some people might think is a good idea, but, every once in a while, folks will call up and complain that they didn't get it, and it's really because they put us in the same spam folder. But anyway, okay, moving on. Let's see, Hayward. So we start off with 3 core principles that serve as a foundation for understanding the function of school boards and how they operate. The first one is a core principle, number 1, purpose of school boards. And this is taken from 189.1A, RSA 189.1A, and RSA's being our state statutes. And it used to just be this one paragraph. There are now some additional paragraphs as well, but this one's been around for decades. It shall be the duty of the school board to provide a district expense elementary and secondary education to all pupils who reside in the district. That's why you're here. That's really the only reason a school board exists, is to fulfill that duty. And the rest, everything we talk about after this is, you know, maybe how that works. Obviously, you have multiple constituencies. So if you parse the language that I just read, at district expense, education to all pupils, different constituencies are going to have different understandings of, you know, the number 1, what that means, and number 2, you know, how important is the public expense part as opposed to the public education part? What is education? And so, you know, you've got people who are just taxpayers, you've got retired taxpayers, you've got parents of children in the school districts, you've got students in the school district. And each of those, you know, you might tip the scale one way or the other way, but in the end, the purpose that you're here is to provide that education. And sometimes that's a very helpful place to fall back on when you're stuck trying to figure out a difficult issue. The next core principle that we highlight is the collective authority of a school board. One thing that often comes as a surprise, not only to new school board members, but to experienced ones as well, is that under our state statutes, the only thing that a school board member is elected to do is to sit here, debate things and vote. And as soon as a meeting is over, as soon as a duly called meeting is over, you have no authority to do anything. That doesn't mean that you can't be helpful to your constituents, you can't be a resource for constituents, but it does mean that you don't have any authority to do anything. There are times when a board will delegate responsibilities to an individual member. The primary, you know, the most obvious one is the election of a school board chair. There's nothing in statutes until there's one place where our state laws even recognize that there is such a thing as a presiding officer, and that's in the right to know law, and the presiding officer has the power to declare that there's an emergency for various exceptions of the right to know law. You will not find in any state statute another reference of the school board chair. However, but just think about your meetings. If you didn't have somebody that you all agreed should run your meetings, it'd be a little chaotic and sloppy. So the school board chair is often, number 1, authorized to run your meetings. That's during the meetings. But number 2, to often act as the spokesperson for this board, to sign documents on behalf of the board. And maybe most significantly, besides presiding over the meeting, but most significantly outside of the meeting, is the communication that occurs between the administration and the board chair, primarily for deciding how your agenda is going to work. And not just the agenda that actually appears at the meeting and runs the meeting. There are communications that happen between meetings where the superintendent needs some feedback, at least if not input on a decision. And so that, you know, it's hard to come up with examples sometimes that are demonstrated well, but superintendent has an issue, not quite comfortable just, you know, firing off and making a decision, and you know, they make decisions all day long, hundreds of decisions all day long that they don't have board meetings about. But you reach that point where I'm not sure that this is something that the board has given guidance on, whether it's by formal vote, by discussions or what have you. So contacts the chair, and the chair will decide, do we need to have a special meeting to resolve this issue? Or can we simply say, no, there's enough guidance from board things, or representing the interests of the board, I can say, you can go ahead and do this and just come and report at the next meeting. And then if the board decides, no, we didn't like that idea, well, that's a good place for a discussion and to discuss, you know, maybe tweaking what that next step would be in that context. So sometimes that causes a little conflict with board members, because how come we weren't told of this? Well, you can't have that conversation among a quorum of the board without being at a meeting. So the whole idea of that communication was, do we need to have a meeting? And more often than not, the answer is going to be no, and you're going to hear about it after the fact. You might hear about it in a report even before the meeting, but it's not something that, you know, would require, you know, whatever that was, wouldn't require a meeting. So we talked about all those. So the school board basically acts as a collective body, and it acts upon the will of the majority of the members. If you have a tie vote, then you don't do whatever it was that somebody moved to do. You need a majority of, actually a majority of the board present at a meeting. So if you have a quorum at the meeting, a majority of those at the meeting will decide that issue. And then the third core principle is the difference between governance and management. The school board is a governing body, not a managing body. Even though you do find a couple of words in various statutes where, and even a Supreme Court decision, but it's really talking about, you know, the difference between the legislative body and the school board. But for purposes of, you know, almost all of the statutes, the school board is governance, not management. So that we highlight this language in red because it helps sort of demonstrate the thought. It's not the board's job to run the schools, but to see that they are run well. And how do you do that? You do that through policy setting, setting vision and goals of the district, helping guide a strategic plan for the district, and then you help fulfill those things, the policy, the goals, visions, etc., through oversight of the administration. The superintendent, on the other hand, superintendent's job is to run the schools, and how does the superintendent do that? Does so by implementing the visions, goals, and policies of the board, manages all of the operations of the board, of the district and its schools, and then also has the responsibility to advise the board regarding legal obligations, practical considerations, policy, budget, etc., so that the board can then, you know, either adjust goals, create new policies, what have you. The next few slides are just a couple of examples of, you know, what that might look like. First one is relative to hiring and renewals of personnel. And what we're looking at here are two different Department of Education rules. So if you ever see ED followed by some numbers, that just means a Department of Education rule. And then occasionally you'll see some other administrative rule. By Department of Education, I mean New Hampshire. So you might see LAB for labor, or SAF for safety and so forth, but ED is the starting point for Department of Education rules. On the left side, we have 30301, which is titled Substantive Duties of School Boards. And relative to hiring and renewals of employees, the board's function is to adopt policies necessary and desirable to control and effectuate recruitment and employment. So notice what your function is. It's to adopt policies relative to hiring of personnel. There's some statutory pieces too that we'll get to it later on in the same slide. On the superintendent's side, under ED 30202, which is titled Substantive Duties of Superintendents. Superintendent's function is to nominate all certified staff and appoint other employees in accordance with state law, the rules of the state board, and guess what? School board policies. Just giving a little bit of background to some of the words used in there. Without getting into some of the very confusing nomenclature that, whether we're talking about the Department of Education, state statutes, or the Supreme Court, there's an unfortunate entanglement of different terms that mean the same thing, but maybe they mean slightly different things, and it gets a little bit confusing. But for purposes of the discussion tonight, certified staff are your teachers and other folks who are required to have certification through the Department of Education. There are other folks that you employ who have certifications, but they're not certifications from the Department of Education. So they're not necessarily within this nominate and elect thing. So the superintendent nominates all of your certified staff. And then the school board, under a later piece that we'll show you, does what's called elects the certified staff. And that is the formal event that actually hires the person. An important piece of this, however, is that if the superintendent does not nominate a person who requires certification, the school board can't hire that person. So the nomination has to come from the superintendent. The other part of that A is the appoint other employees. And this is a place where policy really can be demonstrated, because the larger the district, the less likely it is the board is going to have the time to really dig deep into the part-time custodian who cleans up after the rec basketball games on Saturdays. Manchester School Board does not spend a lot of time doing it, but the smaller the district, the more likely it is. And by policy, the school board can decide, where that line is. It can simply be superintendent, that's your job. If we hear problems, then, you're going to hear from us, but we're not going to be involved in that. Or the school board can make it exactly the same process as it uses for the statutory process used for teachers. And many districts have that, and then many districts have, less is more type approach. But that's a place where the process is determined by school board policy. But school board policy also can apply to the certified staff provisions, because your policy can dictate how recruitment works, what the process might be that leads to the superintendent's nomination decisions. So for instance, before I came to NHSBA, I represented boards for all 20-something years. And I had one district that wanted to prioritize experience. So they first wanted the hiring process to focus on educators with at least 3 years of experience. Doesn't mean you're always going to be able to find one, and it doesn't mean that that's always going to be the deciding factor, but the board wanted that approach. More frequently, though, I had boards that focused on academic preparation. So, where they were after the basic bachelor's degree. So did they have a master's degree? Were they on the track for that? So those are places where the board, again, gets to influence by policy, the recruitment and hiring process. So a couple more, just want to make sure. So under those statutes, I referenced this a little bit. I'm not going to dig too far into all the weirdness of language used in those three authorities. But under 18939, that's the statute that really is the foundation for the weird language of nomination and election. RSA 18914A, that's your renewal statute. So that's where teachers and other specific certified professionals are, have their contracts renewed for a subsequent year. And then ED 302 we just covered, but in each of those, you use the nomination and election process. For a renewal, it's renominate and reelect. And let's see, next, we talked about that. Yeah, that's just the so when I said that there's a specific group of certified professionals for which the renewal statute applies, teachers, principals, librarians, and guidance counselors. There's something blocking my language here, but let's see. One thing, the one place where a school board might be able to hire somebody, well, actually not hire, but rehire somebody that the superintendent has failed to renominate, is in that process. So if somebody is an experienced teacher with more than 5 years of experience and they are non-renewed, and there's a little exception there, asterisks there, but just basically 5 years experience within the district and they're not renewed, that person has the right to request a hearing by the board. And if the board hears that case and disagrees with the superintendent, then the board could reappoint that person, notwithstanding that they hadn't been renewed. It's rare that happens, but that is something within your authority. So another example of the difference between management and governance is another function of personnel, and that is supervision. So under 30301, which is the same provision that I read before, but I pulled different words out and put different words back in. Again, though, adopt policies necessary and desirable to control and effectuate the employment, evaluation, and dismissal of teachers and other employees. And then on the superintendent side, this is really strong language, and you don't see this anywhere else in the Department of Education rules, or not quite this strong when you're talking about the difference between the boards and the superintendents. Superintendent's responsibility is to direct and supervise the work of all employees of the district or districts within the SAU and shall have all powers necessary to make such direction effective. That's pretty strong language. Still has to do it subject to the board's policies. So you have within your G section of your policy manual, many policies that apply to employees. Some are required by law, some are required by law, but allow for a lot of, board interpretation and adjustments. And then some are just best practice type policies that you as the school board have the authority to establish. So board governs personnel through policies. This minimizes cross purposes and conflicting directives, especially in the context of collective, not individual authority. Meaning that if you didn't have that single point of supervision, that hierarchical approach to employees, and you allow individual board members to actually, give instructions and so forth, that creates a bit of chaos and probably a lot of inefficiency and also maybe cross purposes relative to, if the superintendent is expecting the facilities director to be doing this, but you've got a board member saying you need to go fill the potholes. That creates an issue. Also creates an issue relative to, you know, the proper expenditure of monies of the district, because instead of paying for what, you know, the board directed the superintendent to direct the facilities person to do, they're off doing something else. Yes.
Question. So in the news recently, there's been a case where there was a special ed teacher and probably a paraprofessional harming it's not the state, I don't think it was the state, but they were harming an autistic child,
No, it
throwing
wasn't
things
the
at them.
state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I read I heard that that the board was firing the superintendent, which they have every right to fire the superintendent, but they're also firing the principal. So can they do that?
I don't,
And then once the board has decided to fire a superintendent, which I hope we never have to do, who then takes
I
over, then has the right to all those other things that superintendent does?
so I hadn't quite heard that the superintendent was in the firing line yet.
Well, I think because of what you just wrote there, that they're in charge of all employees, and it was like, this should have been known, because it's happened,
Well,
it happened before. I guess.
right, so, let me go to the second question first, and then we'll back up and ask the first question again, because I think I lost it. You know, I was like, oh, really? I hadn't heard that. So the second question is, cross your fingers, hope for the best. And, we've got 2 districts right now, which functionally have no superintendent. And last week, I think I probably spent about 60% of my time last week dealing with transgender issues, and then 30% of my week dealing with this one district that the superintendent disappeared and the BA quit. Because they found somebody.
Say no more.
Yeah, there were lots and lots of problems which caused those 2 things to occur. And actually, the second thing, the BA quitting, was the hiring of somebody to come in and just fill the rest of the year as the superintendent. They didn't like that person, so they quit. And right after they quit, they discovered there was $100,000, like a deficit. So anyway, the answer is that you, generally, people will reach out to us, or the DOE, but the DOE often points them to us anyway. And we try to find somebody who's got free time on their hands, either because they retired last year, or they, you know, they either retired last year or they're working part-time for another district. And sometimes, in a real crunch, it might just be a surrounding superintendent who's willing to help out. Because when you see the superintendent's duties, and we'll cover some, you know, different places, I think a few slides from now. Obviously, the superintendent is not doing business administration work in a district this size. Superintendent better know, you know, the fundamentals of that, because that's how they supervise the BA. So when your superintendent disappears in the, I think that's right. You did just have this. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. This time of the year, this time of year is a blur for us. I'm sorry. So when that happened, well, no, back to superintendents in general. You don't need a certified superintendent to be your BA. You do need a certified superintendent to supervise your BA and to supervise your student services director and supervise your principals and so forth. So anyway, when you have that problem where you don't have the superintendent, and you get somebody from the neighboring town or somebody who can at least give you 1 or 2 days a week, they're really overseeing just in the big picture thing. Did you file that report with the DRA? Because I know it's due this month and it's due for you too. So, just so you need that person to sign off, and they've got to be a certified superintendent. That said, I'll also say that the DOE currently has a different view of the particulars that are required, and they're probably a little bit more flexible. But it depends on who you are. You know, they may be a little bit more particular for some places than others. And it's not always clear, but it's a good place to call. And like I said, sometimes they point them to us. And so what was the first question?
Does so in this case, the board was letting go the principal and the superintendent?
So the board would not be able to release the well, no, actually, here's something that
Productions.
is a little confusing. Each of the people, I think, other than the aide that they were talking about, so the para that they were talking about, and I think there might be one other person who is within a collective bargaining agreement. Actually, that district, I think, actually has an administrators union as well. So there's a lot of little pieces that decide who can do what, but a principal typically, even though they fall within 189-14A, which is a renewal statute, they typically have an individual contract that probably has termination clauses in it. And it typically would not be the board that has the first shot. It would be the superintendent. The board would always have the first shot at the superintendent. And then, but some of the other employees would be different. So let's say it was a teacher, the board could not fire a teacher. And if the board directed the superintendent to fire a teacher and the teacher appealed that, the board would have to recuse themselves because they had already taken a position before they had actually heard the teacher's evidence. So, and we'll talk about that as well. So it's not always clear, but in that case, my understanding, and I think it was probably Thursday was the last time I picked up on any news, but there were 4 or 5 people who were put on leave by the superintendent, which is the first step in the disciplinary process of those subordinate employees. Did that?
No, that's fine. I was just curious, because I didn't, he had that power, and I just wondered why I heard that, so.
Well, given the news last week, the reason I spent so much time on this one issue was because there was a report going around that we told people to do something that we had never said. So anyway.
Okay.
You just have to be careful with, what you read in the newspapers. So the last one, I'm not gonna spend as much time on this because I want to be mindful of your own time, but for fiscal matters, I think remember back when that slide about the difference between governance and management, and the last bullet was the superintendent has the responsibility to advise the school board and to provide information and to the board to help the board make good decisions. So this set here is actually a good example of sort of the circular relationship, and just jump to the second prongs of each one. So the paragraphs E and D, the board has the duty. You have a budget committee, correct? Right.
Yes.
So even though you have a budget committee, you as a board are required to prepare a budget. And depending on the situation, budget committees more or less work well with boards. But in the end, if you end up with differences and the board feels strongly enough that its proposal is better for the students of the district, then going through the process, the hard process of preparing a budget, helps the board make that case to the voters when it does come time for annual meeting. And, I don't have much information about how your budgets have been going. But when you look over to the superintendent's side, superintendent is responsible for developing and recommending to the school board the annual budget in accordance with school board policy. Let's see, down at the bottom of that page, I don't see the full page because I've got oh, there we go, it's dancing on my screen. It just connects to the larger handout that I gave you. So 14 and 15 includes a copy of RSA 194C4, which we'll talk about a little bit on the next page. And then 15 through 17 includes the full text of the superintendent rules and Department of Education rules and also the school board rules. So management superintendent services, this touches upon a couple of the things that we discussed. So 189.24 and 194C both require you to employ a qualified person to provide superintendent services. 194C though, kind of makes a little distinction there. You're not required to necessarily have somebody as a superintendent who is an employee. You can contract with somebody who has that certification to provide the overview. Usually on a district this side, that would probably not be a great idea. But there are some very small districts, 50 kids or so, where, the neighboring SAU has a superintendent who comes in 5 hours a week and makes sure that, the little things that need to get done and the big things that need to get done have been done. Oops, I have to fix those page references there because that's not correct. Let's see. Under 194C4, and then those two rules, they all assign all aspects of management of the school district to the superintendent. And then more general terms, 30201 designates the superintendent as the executive officer and does these things, but then notice as those services are further defined and directed by the governing body. So sometimes you'll hear the expression, the school board only has one employee, that's the superintendent, and the superintendent directs and supervises all of the other employees of the district. Oops, I couldn't see that bottom one. Oops, back up. Yeah. Oh, well. I don't know what was at the bottom. You guys can see that. This little matrix here, I'm not going to spend any time on it other than to say that the left-hand side, which identifies, various functions of a school board and management of the school district, and the other two are just showing, how that might look. And within school board policy, you can move sort of lines one way or the other in each of those functions, except to the extent that statutes might say otherwise. So for instance, you couldn't by school board policy say that you can only nominate people that we have said that you can nominate so that then you can elect the person that you nominate. That would sort of defeat the whole idea of the statute. But in those places where there aren't those clear edicts from statutes, you have a lot of flexibility. Make sure I get the right button. There we go. Let's see. So the next several slides are really looking at, as I said, those buckets of responsibilities that school boards have. And the first is, and it's really, the how you govern as opposed to a real bucket, but the real function of a school board is to govern the district through policy decisions. And at the very, here, let me just get to, there we go. We started calling out this difference between the big P and the little p for policy. And the big P is, I think, what you and probably, many of your predecessors understood as being those, the documents that are in your manual that have a code. But every time you make a legislative decision, or even the small executive decisions you make, hiring, electing a teacher, for instance, those are policy decisions. You are deciding a direction that the board is going to go on a particular issue. And then, so we've got the big P, that's the things with the capital letters that are coded in your manual. And then you've got the little p, for all of the other decisions you make, whether you took a formal vote or you just did something by consensus. You had a discussion, you realized you needed more information on a particular thing. So you looked at the superintendent or the business administrator and said, can you bring this information to the meeting next time we have a meeting? That is a direction that the board has ordered. That is a little p decision. But whether we're talking about the big P's or the little p's, maybe more importantly, the big P's.
Yeah.
What they do is they express the guidelines and the philosophical statements which chart the district's course of action. They advise the staff and the school community of legal requirements. And by legal requirements, I'm including the policy directives of the school board itself. So the legal requirements and the district standards and rules. There are many, we'll go to the, yeah. Many directives that apply not just from policy, but from state laws, state regulations, federal laws, federal regulations. And the policy manual serves as a resource for those things. We've got a couple of policies where if you looked at the legal authorities that led to that policy, there might be 20 of them. And without the written policy, how would you find them and how would you connect the dots to see which part is, more important in a particular area than another? So they're intended to help staff, help students, help parents, help board members, help employees understand, the different legal requirements that are applying to or legal options that are applying to a particular circumstance. And then lastly, they create the framework within which the superintendent manages the district and the staff discharge their assigned duties. Just a little bit about the NHSBA policy manual. So for anybody who's not familiar with it, we do use the alphabet code that is used by, I think it's about 23 states. There are a handful of districts in New Hampshire that use one of 3 different systems. But in any event, we have the alphabet categories. So the first ones are general application, B is for board, C is administration, D is fiscal. And there's, many places where they overlap so much and it's just me sitting there trying to figure out where it best fits. And we used to have several dual or tri-coded policies. I've been trying to remove those because what happens is, a school board or NHSBA will revise one, but forget to revise the other one. And then you end up with conflicting policies. So slowly I've been trying to remove those as as we revise or update certain of them. But so the first, outside of the alphabetized categories, we also have 3 different general classifications. Priority required by law, or recommended, or optional. The priority required by law, in all but maybe one instance, reflect language in a statute or a regulation to the effect of, doesn't always say the same thing, but the local board shall adopt a policy, or the local district shall have a policy, but it says you have to have a policy. That is what that means. Sometimes, more or less, the authority that is requiring the policy then lays out 26 elements that you have to have in your policy. So it's very prescribed what's in your policy. Other times, there's much less content that's specifically required. So for the federals, they tended to be very content specific, very procedurally specific, but not always. So for instance, the meal charging regulations, they have a lot of options in there. They lean very heavily and try to make sure that, you know, kids are not food shamed and that kids have food when they come to school, notwithstanding whether their parents have paid the bill or not. But there, even though it leans heavily in that direction, there are several places within that regulation where districts have options. The recommended policies, more often than not, reflect statutes or regulations that include requirements or prohibitions. So instead of it saying the local board shall adopt a policy, it will say the local district shall do A, B, or C, or the local board shall not do A, B, or C. So it's giving a very specific requirement or prohibition, but it's not specifically requiring a policy. But then how would you find out what the legislature told you to do in 1968? It's probably in a policy. And that's why, you know, that's, you know, what I meant by the manual helps serve as a resource, local resource, so people can find things that apply to situations as they arise. Some situations you might never see, but other situations, you know, they come up year after year, every other year, et cetera. The other piece of recommended is you know, there may be operational best practices that we think are more important than just the optional category. So for instance, KEB, there is no requirement anywhere that you have a specific policy about complaints about personnel or students. It's a good idea to have one. And we think it's it strongly encouraged that you have one, so we put it in recommended as opposed to optional. And then the optional typically are they're practice documents, or they're things that member districts have requested. So we get 3 or 4 requests, and it's just easier to put it in the manual than for me to just answer phone calls and say, yes, no, we don't have one, but I can find one for you, et cetera. And then I think, so at the bottom, I can read most of it and I get the gist. Our sample policies are that. We used to hear them referred to as model policies. I don't like that word because it takes away the notion that you are drafting it's your policy. It's the school board's policy, not Will Phillips' policies, not NHSBA's policies. They're starting points for your district. For the ones that have lots of legal references, if you want to fool around with those, talk to your private counsel, talk to me, or if somebody really wants to go through the statutes and regulations themselves, that's okay. Because our samples are intended to be, here, you can take this, and most of the work is done. And if you disagree with things, check to make sure that you're still in compliance with the law. And if you are, then you can change it. But they really are intended to be starting points for you. And let's see, moving along. Okay, next. So we've got number 2 of the big buckets. General oversight. Back to that red language from that early slide. Not your job to run the district, but to see that, or run the schools, but to see that they're run well. How do you do that? If the only time you have authority is at these meetings, or in certain limited executive functions, you do that primarily through hiring and evaluating the superintendent. In a single district SAU, it's far easier to understand how that works because it works the way you want it to work. We already talked about that, but under RSA 194C, the school board is charged with hiring the superintendent, but this last sentence is the kicker. It doesn't tell you how to do that. So you get to decide how you do that. And as long as you're, complying with state and federal laws, you can pretty much do it any way you want to do it. And then the more important one well, actually, I don't want to say the more important one, because selecting the right superintendent is, if you get it right and you have a superintendent for 5 to 10 years, you're really lucky. Right now, I think the average turnover for superintendents is somewhere between 3 and 5 years. Used to be between 5 and 10 years. So it, you really want to take that task seriously and dig deep, and I know you've been through it, a couple of times. You're in the middle of it now. In the middle of it now. But, as you can see, if you don't get it quite right, then things don't work well for a while. But the bigger, the continuing, responsibility and opportunity that you have for, making sure that it's run well is through evaluation. And evaluation doesn't just mean that, one thing at the end of the year, where you've decided here's, it worked well or it didn't work well, or here's ways we can improve. But it also is, you are evaluating the superintendent every time there's a meeting. You're evaluating the superintendent every time you hear something, from a neighbor about what's happening in the school district. In the example that you gave, about the school district on the coast, that's an evaluation moment. It's like, so why didn't you know? Well, I didn't know because these 5 people who were on leave didn't do what they were supposed to do. I can't, so there's a sort of aggregate of information that you receive from all different sources that are part of the evaluation for each of you, relative to the superintendent. Are you having continuing budget problems? Are you having continuing, having to do fiscal adjustments all the time? Do you have a problem with discipline in the school? Things like that are the pieces of information that help you inform the 40,000 foot view that you have approaching the evaluation process. But there is an evaluation process, the more formal evaluation process. Under 30301K, the school board is required to evaluate the superintendent annually. Again, there is absolutely no further information than that. It just says evaluate the superintendent annually. I think it also says according to the standards determined by the board or something like that. So it's completely within your authority how that works. However, we think that the best form of this works when you establish goals at the beginning of the year. And those goals are set by both you as the board and the superintendent. You have discussions about the goals, and there may be a little pushback one way or the other. But that's the thing that you're evaluating for that year. You're communicating what your expectations are, what your hopes are for the upcoming year. And then it says midpoint update, but basically what we're saying is you should have periodic discussions about where you are in meeting the goals that you established early on. There are some districts, I think it might be, just for locally, I think if you look at keen school districts, policy CBI, or it might be SAU 20, it's probably SAU 29. They even have like a calendar about the, things that they're going to do. And I'm not saying that's the best one, or it might not be the best for here, but remember that I think they have 8 school districts. So it's very, that's a complicated process where, just like the hiring process, it's up to all of you here to decide the calendar and so forth. But anyway, so you have those midpoint updates or those periodic updates. You get to the end of the year evaluation and you're, really compiling, some thoughts as to how things worked over the previous year, discussions with the board, you complete the formal evaluation, and then the board should step back and look at itself. So that it can move into that goal setting for the next year. And when that happens, can differ district to district, board to board. One that I've only heard of one district that does it this way, but I kind of like it. The board that is outgoing is the one completing, sort of getting the meat of the evaluation, where the board that's incoming is the one that's doing the goals for the next year. And that kind of makes sense. But, you know, again, there's no prescribed way to do this. It's up to the board to figure it out. Oh, look at that.
Can I make a request? We have other business to do to take care of tonight too, and we have a member who has to be somewhere at 8.
Okay,
Can we skip to, if the board's okay with this, skip to slide 24, which is holding meetings and communication?
sure. Let me just, I'll just say budget is fiscal expression of policy, and there's ways you can oversee how that's working. Do some strategic planning if you haven't already, but I am trying to jump
Keep
through
trying.
just to see what I'm
Keep losing
missing.
their superintendents.
This is a
Get
big,
it done.
this is a big one for me, is this slide 19. If you don't have a formal communication plan, I'd suggest that it's a very important thing for you to do. You know, remember, you've got members of your community now that have never looked at a newspaper. They might, you know, wrap fish in it or something. And then you've got members of your community who have never used a computer. So you've got to figure out ways to communicate with all those folks. I do want to, 21 is important, especially for a member who hasn't been here. So all of the things that we've talked about before, those are all legislative functions. Sometimes you're called to act in a quasi judicial function. And this is actually the piece that really underscores the need for a member not to over involve herself or himself in personnel or student matters. You know, you're going to get complaints or communications from members of the community or teachers or so forth, parents about you know, about people that are within your jurisdiction. You need enough information to be able to refer that to the superintendent or the principal, depending on how your protocols work. But you don't need to know, you know, so somebody calls about something that happened in second grade, you don't need to know, well, how, did they ever have this problem before? Who was there? Who saw it? All you need to know is who it was that called you. What is the particular identification of the person, and then pass that along. And that way, when it does, if it does come to a point where you have to be making decisions about somebody's rights, you haven't forced yourself into an exclusion where you have to remove yourself from the board in making decisions. And then, okay, the right to know law, and this is really the quickest version that I can do with meetings. So we're not going to talk about documents at all. But under the right to know law, all meetings of the school board are open and public, and that they're required to be open to the public. The school board also means the school board's subcommittees. It doesn't mean purely administrative committees. So, you know, if the high school has a faculty committee to study something, that is not a public body under the right to know law. But if the school board wants the faculty of the high school to have a committee and establishes a committee and directs here's who's going to be on it, that probably is a board committee and would be subject to these same rules. Non-public sessions are parts of a public meeting, meaning that they come after the beginning of a meeting and before the end of a meeting, for which the board is authorized by 91A3 to exclude the public from discussions and decision-making regarding specific issues. That's that checklist that's in the right to know resources. And if you, the language is in each of the reasons you can go into non-public is very specific. And if you can't see exactly the reason you're going into non-public, you probably shouldn't be going into non-public. So for instance, hiring of personnel, hiring of an employee is not the same thing as personnel. Personnel is very broad. position, deciding, how many teachers you're gonna have. That's all in public. Talking about a specific employee, that can be a non-public under one of three different criteria. A non-meeting is different than a non-public session. A non-meeting is called that because it is an exception to the definition of meeting under 91A2. There's no other easy term for it. So non-meeting does not appear in the statute, but it appears in cases, and that's how all education law and municipal attorneys refer to this exception to the definition of a meeting. There are 4 statutory situations, only 3 that apply to school boards, and really only 2 that we'll focus on. One is consultation with counsel. So that is legal consultation. The attorney has to be able to communicate with you contemporaneously. Doesn't have to physically be present, could be on a Zoom. You could have a Zoom conference at lunchtime while you're all in your private offices. We used to do them by conference calls. When it's a non-meeting, there's no need to publicly notice it. You don't need minutes. You don't have to have it in a public location. So all of those things that apply to a meeting, I think they're on the next slide, would not apply to a non-meeting. The second major reason for having a non-meeting is for collective bargaining, strategic discussions, or the negotiations themselves. And the strategic discussions, so when the school board is talking about the strategy for getting to an agreement, that is something that doesn't have to happen in a meeting. And in fact, it can't happen in a meeting unless it's in public session, because when you look at the list of reasons to be a non-public session, it's not there. Obviously, for efficiency's sake, the way you could do it, and the way you would do it, is to just recess your public meeting, go into the library and have your non-public, your non-meeting, and then reconvene the meeting. Or just do it before the meeting or after the meeting. Meeting, duck test, there are 3 criteria, and if these 3 criteria are present in the conversation, then you are having a meeting and you should have, or should be, complying with the right to know law. So the first, a quorum of a public body, I forget what you have, 7 or 5?
Yeah.
7. So any 4 of you, or if it's a committee that has 3 board members, then it's 2 of you. So 2 of you on a committee wouldn't be able to talk about matters that are before that committee. So a quorum of the public body, convening in any manner in which the participating members are able to communicate contemporaneously for the purpose of discussing or acting upon something over which the body has control, jurisdiction, or advisory powers. So sometimes called jurisdictional or official matters. If you have all 3 of those things, then you have a meeting and you need to have complied with the right to know law. The second indicia there, the communication one, includes all digital communication. So Facebook comments, text messaging, voicemail, all of the, or emails is the biggest one.
Misty's our police on that.
Oh, yeah, no, she's well versed.
Please don't reply all.
Yes.
Always do blind CC.
Right. There is another provision that's not covered in this slide. Even if you're not doing it contemporaneously, let me just say, email, the courts have said, allows for contemporaneous communication. And it's not whether you're communicating contemporaneously, it's whether you're able to communicate contemporaneously. So anything that allows for that contemporaneous communication is going to trigger that. And I've said that really the only one that wouldn't fall within that is probably snail mail. However, there's another provision of the right to know law that says serial communications or any communication intended to circumvent the rules would also be a violation. So if you're thinking, how can we do
Smoke
this?
signals.
How, no, smoke signals are contemporaneous, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Pretty much everybody could see that.
Right, especially if you have fire tower, but then,
Oh my God.
so no substantive communications among a quorum outside of a public meeting.
Period.
The little parenthetical there, there is information that one of you would not be able to send to other board members. That the superintendent and the administration can, however, send to you because that's how you're informed. So something big happens at the school and superintendent sends that to you. It probably says that, don't reply to this. It needs to be discussed at a meeting, but it's your way of being informed other than through, Facebook and that kind of thing. No, there's no such thing as a legal straw poll, by the way. We still hear that from time to time, a sense of the board, all the same thing. If you're talking about how you feel about something that's before the board, that needs to happen at a meeting. Okay. So how much time do you want me to wrap up? Do you want to take questions? What would you
Well,
like?
does anybody have any questions at this moment? I know it's a lot. Okay.
She's a lawyer, she's.
Great.
For sure.
Watch out, they might give you a job somewhere at the state house. Maybe.
I think we can probably move pretty quickly through to the next step.
Oh, well, the rest are just some practice tips for communications. And if your district probably has a better handle on this than almost every other, because Misty really does know this stuff. I did surprise her once, like a year or two ago. She said, "No, really?" I was like, "Yeah." But anyway,
The only thing that I find gray in what you've discussed, and I work for SAU 70. Used to be here. I'm the business administrator up there. So the only thing that we've gotten potential different advice on is even if it's a school group or termed a school committee, if we're sending a representative of the school board to attend that meeting, then we've been told to err on the side of caution and call it a
Yes.
public meeting.
yes,
Even if it's not a committee of the school board.
right.
If we're sending somebody from our board to be involved in any of the discussion.
I don't disagree with that at all, and,
So it's,
because we
so
get
you
that,
wanna be aware, you wanna make
Yes.
sure your administrators know that, like, don't be inviting school board members to these unless, you're following all of you wanna be careful.
there are,
Cause we have like CPP committees and we have like, we don't have the school board up there doesn't have like, whatever.
the
Governance structure.
The three biggest pieces that I think
Yeah.
relative to what makes a public body when you're talking about committees. Who created the committee or required the committee? So if the board wants a committee.
Yeah, that's a done deal.
Done deal, and it doesn't matter if there are no board
Correct.
members on the committee.
Right, it's one of ours.
Right. Second one is, are there any board liaisons?
That's it.
Representatives.
Yeah.
That's the second one.
Yeah.
And the third one is, who does the committee report to?
Right.
Okay, so the example I always use is, school board at a meeting says, you know what? We need to do something about the lines on the athletic field. Superintendent, come back to us with something next week to tell us what we should do about lines on athletic field. Superintendent goes home, don't know the faintest thing, I don't care. I'm just gonna have a committee. I'm gonna make a committee and they're gonna tell me, and then I'm gonna tell the board. That's okay. That is not a school board committee. But if the school board says, we need a committee to tell us what to do. And here's who's going to, we just need a committee.
Yeah.
And superintendent, go make a committee and come back and tell us. I think you've crossed that line
Yeah.
now. So, it's gray and we walk a very, we try to make people understand that, but, there are just districts in the state that, you've got school boards that think they should be involved in everything, and that's okay. But if they are, then post it, and it's a lot easier to post it than it is to fight over whether you should post it. I think. It's been a while. Yeah, just, I mean, the communication best practices speak for themselves.
Yeah, we have a big policy on it.
So, that it?
I think
Do you
so.
want me to backtrack? Do you want me to skipped over a few of those things? I'm happy to do whatever you'd like.
I think having this ahead of time where we could all look through it was really, really good. So I
Okay.
appreciate that very much. And I think it looks like there's no questions or concerns, but if anybody wants to come up with something, we can email you or through Misty.
They know where to find me.
Mm.
And
I
it's,
think
it's
this-
always a nice break in my day, too, by the way.
Well, we're glad to have you, but I think this is also great, and I mentioned to Misty right in the beginning, is that it might be really great to have on our website so that the public can go and see what our responsibility is. So that they
That
understand
would
where
be
we're limited.
Really helpful, because I get people in Ackworth who are like, well,
You're my
Why-
board member,
you're
why
my
can't you
board
just tweet
member,
this?
just, yeah, and they're also like, well, you need to, why don't you, like, why don't you do like a community, community talk every so often at the village store? And I'm like, well, Misty would yell at me.
Because we give you a forum to come to already, so.
So you're good with us sharing this, because I was gonna share it with my board members on Dresden.
Oh, a lot, yeah, it's all over the place anyway.
Yeah,
There's so many web,
But We've got
any-
like 3 new ones, so,
yeah,
yeah.
it's usually included in board packets.
Yeah.
We typically,
I think they're gonna attend, but I thought they were well done.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah.
I did want to say the one thing to the new person. Welcome,
This is
number
Karen.
one.
Thank you.
Good luck. No, no, but just on the issue of, because we jumped over it pretty quickly, but the issue of how do you handle the phone calls or being accosted in the recycling center or the produce aisle or what have you. Have ready in your head, because you will be surprised from time to time, have ready in your head how to, number one, help the person get to where they need to go. So I think it's very important for all board members to have at least AC. So that is if you go to AC, that will tell you the various little pathways for dealing with types of complaints, whether it's bullying or discrimination complaint, or just if it's just a complaint about a kid or an employee. And so that's one, so AC, but that one's a little bit complicated, and if somebody's really just talking about what one kid did to another kid, KEB is probably the easiest one, and know, number one, the policy, and number two, how to tell somebody how to get to the policy. So you actually have a pretty easy site to meander through. You just go to your site, under board, there's policies, go to policies and alphabetically in KEB. So if you know the KEB, you can help them, because that's the pathway for them to approach that problem. So you can help them by understanding that process. And then the second thing is just making sure that you have enough information to helpfully pass it along to the person who needs to know. And then in a well-functioning system, you'll probably get a little feedback. So I thank you for that. I talked to the principal. And then if you hear 2 weeks later from the same person saying, hey, nobody's talked to me, then hey, you need to go, talk to the principal some more, because this is, so it's just putting the brakes on the conversation so you're not too deeply involved in the information. You're not precluded from receiving information. It's a small community. Of course, you're going to hear things. But you just keep yourself away from investigations and developing issues. Okay?
good advice.
Thank you very
Well,
much.
again, thank you very much for inviting us out here. Again, it's kind of the most pleasant part of the job, because we actually get to meet the people who are our members, and not just sit and stare at my computer. So thank you, and have a good night, and good luck in the upcoming year.
Yes.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. We were at about 297.
So Barrett, we said hi.
Yes.
I will do that. I think he might, I think he's coming back from a conference today. I will tell you.
Can we
Right, safe travels
raise
home.
this up so they can't see our laptops? Cause I can't open up information that I think people might be able to see.
Well, thank you for setting that up for us. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Yeah, great documents, thanks.
All right, the next order of business is old business, the service FRP.
Yeah, RFP.
RFP, sorry.
So, the deadline is, for them to be submitted by noon on April 9th, which is what, 2 weeks? 2.5 weeks or so. We would like to, we're asking the committee meet at 5:30, for spend a couple of hours probably. We're only anticipating 2 bids. To review those bids, the RFP has a rubric for scoring. So we're looking for a board member to participate in that. We have a community member, we have 2 principals. Scott from the business office will be managing the team and the process. We just want to round it out with the board member.
When is that?
April 9th at 5:30.
April 9th at
What
5.
day of the week is it?
It's a Wednesday. And we really need to do it then because we need to be able to make a recommendation to the board on the 14th. It's a multi-year contract, so we need to have board approval to move forward. We have to have a sample contract back to the state, I believe, by May 1st. So we have a really short window, so we need to do the work so we can have that recommendation to the board on the 14th.
Let me look at my calendar.
I can do that.
All right, fantastic.
She has no preconceived
Yes,
notions about
There'll
either
be
one
chicken
of them.
salad there for her. It's her first. She volunteered for this, so.
I don't think I can do that because that might be influential.
Just
Just don't have to
just
make it.
email
I always
Misty.
thought
Yeah,
this
I should do a taste test.
was you.
Misty
Well,
knows.
Karen,
how
thank you
to
very
get
much
chicken
for
salad.
signing on for that.
Sure.
I appreciate you jumping right in.
Awesome.
All right, then moving right along. I assume everybody had a chance to take a look at the personnel list. Can I have a motion? Thank you. And a second?
Yep.
Any questions? Any concerns? All in favor? Thank you very much. The same for the teacher renewal contract. Are there any questions, concerns?
I have a question / recommendation.
Do we need a motion first?
I would think so.
I'll make a motion.
Can I have a second, please?
Second.
All right.
I appreciate the list with the names and the job titles. I think, and I know that we didn't do it our first year, and this year's kind of been crazy too. So next year, I think I would like to see the full FTE beside the person's name and if I have a couple of ones that we've used, I'm sure you probably have one from before where you've used it too. I just think it's sometimes confusing for people. If they see somebody's name listed 4 times, I know what it is, because I worked here, right? I know it's a third, and whatever, and a 0.1. But I think it's important so that I want to try to, before too long, I want to try to be able to tie these things back to our budgeting documents when we have discussions during the budget, section.
Is that
I can
something-
actually, so I have that information readily available. I could actually send it to you now. I had just taken that column out, but I
Oh,
can certainly
gotcha.
include that. And when in the minutes, I could certainly.
Yeah, I just think it's helpful.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's gonna be super helpful probably moving forward during budgeting, especially with what's gonna start going on.
Yes.
I'll send that I'll put it in the folder just so you can see it for reference.
Thanks.
That would be helpful.
Thank
It
you.
will also be helpful during our next topic, during that discussion too, to know what people are aware, how much. Right?
Yes. All right, any other questions or concerns on the list? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. I should ask any opposed. All right. So a review of the steps for the upcoming withdrawal process. Oops,
Sorry.
I thought it was bedtime. My phone does the same thing when I'm supposed to go to bed.
Mine does too. Oh, that's funny.
Like my body was like, oh.
Documents.
That's funny.
All right, there were two letters in the board packet, one to the select boards and one to the
Same here.
to the community. Did everybody have a chance to look them over? Were there any questions and concerns with those? With the timeline, with the requirements? I feel like we've all been through this before and it's still a little fresh. No, you've never been through?
Nope.
Okay,
Well,
well.
guess what you get to do?
No, if I do this, then somebody's doing budget committee.
No, I'm not doing
Because
that.
I'm already in budget committee deep to my neck, okay, and I'm at large. And I'm on the, and I'm from the town that thinks that they
This
need to
was
be
assigned to a
themselves.
town. Don't get a choice.
I
Right.
don't think you want me on that, put it that way.
Well, no, I think the RSA specifically says the town representative.
Representative.
It has
part
to
of it.
be a
So
part of it.
as at large,
At large, she
you're
gets,
not in that place at the moment.
The
Lord,
first
like-
meeting is on Friday, the 14th.
Do I get to stay if they withdraw then?
That's
'Cause I'm at
crazy.
large. The 14th is Monday, isn't it?
It's not
Oh, I'm
Friday.
looking on the wrong month.
So, the proposal was for us to do the kickoff meeting following our board meeting to keep our board meeting on the 14th short.
No.
And, do a kickoff starting at, I think we said 6.
Doesn't mean I'm not gonna
Do you have a whole
stay
hour?
and participate
Yeah.
from afar.
I think so.
Well, even if they withdraw, it doesn't happen, you know, there's this whole
No,
study.
no, no,
and
yeah, no, I know.
You might be.
Let's just move. on then.
Go
I'm
ahead.
thinking about a little about this, and I would like to, if you have the wherewithal and the ability to, if we can add in a chair to that, who's not maybe, and maybe you could be the chair of that committee and kind of not be a voting member of there, or I don't know how that would work, but since you're not one of the 5 towns, you're at large, right? Could you still have a chair that was somebody else?
I don't know as though there's
I
anything,
think you have to vote from the committee.
So, I think it has to start there and, my understanding is then the withdrawal committee can
Right.
determine the additional members that the board only has purview over.
Okay.
Yeah, that.
Well, that's what I'm gonna suggest, because I think if you're willing to do it, I know you think it was. You're gonna be at every meeting anyway, so.
yeah, but there's two very different levels of involvement.
And I would,
Yeah.
I would love to have Alyssa do that, but I also think it puts her in a very,
Awkward situation.
well, it puts her in an awkward situation for a couple reasons, but I think for the best interest of Alyssa, that is not something that anybody on this board should put her in. Now, what the committee decides to do, what the committee decides to do is whatever the committee decides to do. But I just think that, I just,
Mhm.
I think you're needed on that committee. Your knowledge is needed on that committee. I think you need to stay away from a leadership role.
History.
Yeah, just everything.
When we did the, I'm trying to, it's all blended together now, but when we did, when we did the Charlestown withdrawal. I know you were active, you weren't part of the committee, but you were there and which was wonderful. It was because you were many times were able to kind of bring down emotions.
There were a lot of them.
You kind of kept your dad under control. But,
Taping
did we?
this out.
Yes,
Yeah.
he would agree with you. It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed, cause I did it
He was
with
very
him, I
passionate.
did it with him some too. He was very passionate and it was like, okay, easy. But, I think that as I remember, it seemed like he chaired it, that he was the chair.
He was elected to chair that.
He
by
was elected
committee.
to chair by the committee, right? So, yeah, so the committee, the committee decides who the chair is gonna be.
And it can be, it doesn't have to be a school board member,
It
it can
doesn't-
be any number of people.
You
Either
could,
the
they could
selectman
ask the
member, or they could
moderator,
ask somebody to come in, yeah, we
you
could.
could ask the moderator.
Mhm.
It's an
It is an
impartial
absolute
person.
option, but there could somebody from the public who
Well, I
is
just
a
think-
moderator in another town, or somebody who's shown an aptitude for,
Correct,
being neutral.
managing people.
Mhm.
Yep.
So there's lots of options. I certainly appreciate it.
Moderator.
It's something that I've had dreams and nightmares about.
Yeah,
So I'm looking forward to
Me
the
too.
work coming up.
I've had a lot of thoughts about it.
So are there any other questions with the timeline? Are we good with moving forward and having?
I have a question. It doesn't
Okay.
pertain to the timeline or the instructions that were sent out or the letters. I think all of that's
Have they
clear.
been sent out?
Not yet.
It'll
but
go to,
shared-
we wanted to get
Shared.
it through here first.
shared with us. No, I wanna go back to the warrant article that, and the wording of the warrant article that didn't pass. Because this is a ton of work. And so I wanna know from our legal team, because I think the warrant article was worded that the school, that the town that wanted this done gets to pay for it, right? So that went down in flames,
It was
but,
closer than I thought.
okay, well, whatever, it's still, it was a no. I wanna know, does no mean no in that instance, or because of how it was worded about them, that whoever's interested in leaving had to pay, does that still allow us as the school board to redirect monies to pay for somebody to help our administration
Yeah.
deal with this?
So we checked on that
Oh, good,
with Matt,
yeah,
because we had that very same question.
yeah,
And he said we can employ somebody or contract with somebody
okay, good,
through to the beginning of the new fiscal year. So that means until June 30th.
so that means no, doesn't matter how it was worded.
It's for next
After-
budget season. It's for next year's.
After the, am I saying it
I
right?
don't know,
You have it correct. We
No
are
means
not
right.
able to use any funds to hire anybody for any assistance after July first.
Yeah,
because that was a no,
Yes.
even though it was specific about who was supposed to pay.
Yes.
But we can now,
We
Right
can now,
so we
Okay.
can,
and I think that was in the letter, right?
we can go
we
very
put it, we
quick.
put it in the letter
Oh.
because I really, in some
Sorry, I didn't see
discussions,
that.
I don't know.
I really
I
felt like we
hadn't
should
added
be honest and open
Yeah.
because somebody
I
is
didn't have
going
the
to
language yet.
ask.
Yeah.
Why have you hired somebody when we said no? And
Sweet.
so that's why we had that specific conversation with our attorney.
Okay,
So it's not in the letter, so don't look for it.
oh, okay, I didn't
Thought we
think it
put
was.
in there.
So
Well,
you
we
said
do
something
post
and then
language,
Lori
yeah.
changed the proposed language and the two of us have not talked about it.
Okay, so we were gonna go with her proposed language, yes.
So
it's
is that
supposed to be
going
in
to
there.
help you at all, our folks at all?
We can, we can start pulling data now.
Okay,
I
3
mean,
months?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
this will-
Better than nothing.
Our project plan will front load data requests.
Right,
We can do data analysis on our own.
exactly.
This data, pulling data requests, so we need to do that, needs to be a priority.
Well, I hate
Right.
that even the wording of that didn't protect the ability to carry it through to the next year. I think that's wrong. I don't agree. I don't agree.
I think we just did a kind of a bad job explaining to the communities what that really was.
Right,
I think sometimes people look at a $10,000 number and they don't necessarily read the whole paragraph. And it's kind of our job as the board to kind of get the word out. And I think maybe because it was kind of, we had our hands full with a whole lot of other stuff.
well, and it wasn't a definite.
But I'm glad that we can at least hire someone immediately
Right.
and get hopefully, what I think
Done.
might be the majority of information to the committee by June 31st and
I mean, we do have the RSA that directs specifically what needs to be in that report, so we can get that kind of information to that file. And we also know exactly what people requested for the Charlestown withdrawal, and so that information can go right in. And then we've had conversations at the budget committee about things they're looking for, and those are gonna be the same type of questions that are going to be asked, you know, in this place also. So I think throwing it all in a folder and having it ready in anticipation of those questions will only help now. And that will give some breathing room this summer, I hope, when the committee gets to the analysis part.
And the what if thing, because I think the big part of it's gonna be, especially for the district, if the district that's remaining has to plan, if Walpole leaves, what does that mean for this district? And I think that means some reorganization, so that what if thing is gonna be a big part of that. But I think if we have all the data, we can what if on with Excel, so.
Do we have a copy of the majority and minority report from the Charlestown withdrawal? Could, I think maybe
I
if
can
you,
send everything to you.
yeah, could you just to remind us
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
how?
I'll send you the
sorry, I
file.
wasn't- I wasn't-
You can.
I know.
I wasn't part of the first committee. I was on the outside of this.
Right.
I was doing my own thing.
Yeah.
It was, Alyssa was doing her thing out there and I was doing my thing out there,
I
and
know, you're.
that's how we became
Oh,
really
yeah, I am.
good friends, I guess.
Me and Joe.
I'd like to think so.
Started.
But I do remember, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. Anyways.
So, okay, well, that's good. Does anybody, any other thoughts on that? You're really gonna jump in with 2 feet, so don't be afraid to ask questions. We really have been through it
Yeah.
before, and we're really happy to, you know, pull up things that have been discussed and then, you know, direct questions to where they need to be
I'm gonna ask for a second opinion.
if need be.
It's, you know what, think of it this
Let's
way,
make sure that
it
goes
is
in.
a crash course.
14.
Because it's a definitive language. I don't think,
No, I think that's
I'm gonna
terrific.
ask
And-
Dean.
Crash course, think of it that way.
All right, so we're good with this initial timeline. It'll be dependent on the select boards having their meetings and choosing a representative and sending them on. Sorry, you can't fill both roles and do it at once, but you will have to send somebody else.
There, you know, that's what they're thinking.
I know.
Shelley could just do them, she could do it both, and I'll be like, no.
No, because it still makes one vote short. Like this.
I could do this.
You could.
All right, come on, come on. Because I'm thinking that this means we have a non-public, which just makes
We-
me wanna cry.
We do? I thought
To discuss contracts. That's a non-public.
I thought we weren't doing that anymore because it changed.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, I make a motion, we sign the MS 22.
do I have a second?
Second,
Everybody's got an opportunity to sign it?
it's back.
All right, do you need Jenny's signature on that or else it's not?
Majority.
All right, fantastic.
Hey, why'd Sandra here? Is she talking today?
She is.
All right, let's go. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not the chair. I'm part of the presentation.
Yeah.
Oh, the non-public
We need a
presentation?
motion to go into non-public.
What presentation?
So we'll find out if you listen.
Somebody's just say your second.
Second. I think
Thanks,
so.
Jamie.
And we need a roll call to enter into non-public. Karen, how do you vote?
We all will.
Just say yes.
Yes.
Which
she said.
Evan, yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Sarah, yes.
Let's say yes. All right,
We'll wait until Brendan tells us we're ready.
gives us a little